Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of What's Going On. I'm your host, Tom D'Ambra. As always, we are very thankful you take the time from your busy day to view our program. My friends, I have to, before we get into our main subject matter today, I would like to speak to everybody about the continuing comments, people making communication with me about the situation I found myself in with regards to the court case and people on the property. Notice I didn't say my property. And a lot of people don't understand how is it that we don't own our property. And we don't. I want you to think about this. If you really owned your property, would you be paying an extortion fee every year? Would you have to go get permission from somebody and paid to get that permission, called the permit, to improve on that land, whether it be buildings, new septic system, whatever? Would you have the right to keep people off of your property without having to pay a fee and post it and everything else? You would, if you had a allodial title. We do not have a allodial title in this country anymore. That all ended on March 9th, 1933. What we have, my friends, is a certificate of title. You have a certificate of title for your cars or your vehicles, for your land, everything, for your children. Birth certificate. So why I am saying this is because what the show is all about is trying to educate ourselves as to how we find ourselves into this predicament that we're in. So I want to, and I have done shows upon shows about this matter, about property ownership, and I haven't done it in years, and I can see it's time to revisit it. And for the sake of time, I'm going to be real brief here, revisiting this. So, on March 9th, 1933, we all know they took the gold and silver, they liened the public trust, all of that. We've been through all that, and I'm going to get back into it in future shows. But what I want you to look up, my friends, is Senate Document 43. I'll say that again. March 9th, 1933, Senate Document 43. This comes straight from the Congressional Record. Now listen to the words. The ultimate ownership of all property is in the state, i.e., law amounting to mere user, and must be in accordance with law and subordinate to the necessities of the state. This is why you do not own anything. This is the document that does it. This is from the Congressional Record. This is real. I'll read it again. Senate Document 43. The ultimate ownership of all property is in the state, i.e., law amounting to mere user, and must be in accordance with law and subordinate to the necessities of the state. This is how we lost control of all property. I think I spoke a little bit last week about the manufacturer's instrument of origination when it comes to vehicles. That goes to the state, from the producer of the vehicle to the state, and then the state gives you a what? A certificate of title. Bearer use of. You are merely the user. And my friends, I'm not talking about having a mortgage. That's a whole different thing. By the way, mortgage, death pledge. Go to the morgue, death pledge. So a lot of people are confused on this, and understandably so, because the public fool system is not going to teach you this. So, but I just want to reiterate to everybody who is upset with me because I took this plea deal, but I want you to understand the whole impetus, the genesis of the problem. Not that the people were trespassing and all the rest of all the events that went on. The genesis of the problem, my friends, is this document right here, Senate Document 43, because we do not own land. And as it says, the ultimate ownership of all property is in the state. Okay. I just wanted to hit that home to you folks. So now, let us get a quote from Alexander Solzhenitsyn. This was in September 11th, 1973. Coexistence on this tightly knit earth should be viewed as an existence not only without wars, but also without government telling us how to live, what to say, what to think, what to know, and what not to know. And my friends, that's Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Now, my friends, what is going on today with all the social engineering? We are in a state of war after war after war. And the government is telling us how to live, what to say, what to think, what to know, and more importantly, it is mandating what we will not know. Okay. So recently, we had the 78th anniversary of Pearl Harbor, and I decided to visit that Pearl Harbor event. And before I do that, I want to read a quote to you from Woodrow Wilson. Now, and the reason why I bring this up is because I want you to understand that it wasn't just Pearl Harbor, it's not just 9/11, but even the Civil War and other wars and other events in history are all orchestrated. Now listen to this. When you think about the Civil War in the South, what do you think? All them mean people, they wanted slavery. Woodrow Wilson. The role of slavery became the proclaimed cause of the Civil War because it was necessary to put the South at a moral disadvantage by transforming the contest from a war for independence into a war waged for the maintenance and extension of slavery. So what is he telling you? He's telling you that the whole thing about the war was over slavery was a facade. Like William Casey said, former CIA director, we will know when our disinformation program is a success, when everything the American people believe is false. That's where we're at. So as I read these events to you about Pearl Harbor, keep this in the back of your mind. Because let me just give you some conclusions that I know the general public think about Pearl Harbor right now. First of all, the Japanese snuck attack us with no provocation whatsoever. They just woke up one morning and said, you know what, we're going to go after the big guy in the block and we're going to attack Pearl Harbor. And it was a sneak attack. We had no warning, we had no knowledge of it at all. There were the two big facets about Pearl Harbor that the average American thinks. So let's break down some events about Pearl Harbor. Okay, this here is a picture of Pearl Harbor Battleship Row prior to the attack. And you can see all the ships are lined up pretty, sitting ducks in a row. And I want you to think, my friends, of the horrific war that took place. As a matter of fact, the two gentlemen that are behind the scenes in this program, Stanley and Bill, both of their fathers served in the military in World War II. Both of them. They left family and risked life and limb to go and fight for what they thought was a noble cause because of the sneak attack on Pearl Harbor and other events. Folks, in a poll that was taken right before Pearl Harbor, 88% of the American people did not want to go to the European War, as it was called then. And what did President Roosevelt have to say about going to war in the European War? Let's listen to President Roosevelt in one of his campaign speeches. And one of his speeches, I believe it was in Boston, Massachusetts. Bill, if we could, let's please roll that short clip.
1940, a week before Election Day, the president made a promise he was told he had to make, but feared he couldn't keep.
I have said this before, but I shall say it again and again and again. Your boys are not going to be sent into any foreign war.
Okay, so what do we have here, my friends? We have a president telling the public, your boys, I'll say it again and again and again, your boys will not go to war, foreign wars, fight in foreign wars. You have a public that is solidified. 88% do not want to go to the European war theater. So how did we get to this point that Japan attacked Pearl Harbor? How did we get to the point that the Pacific Fleet was moved from San Diego to Pearl Harbor? Were there any warnings? Did we have any foreknowledge? Did we help the Japanese in any way? Well, let's find out. On December 7th, 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on the U.S. Pacific Fleet in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Now, the U.S. losses were 18 naval vessels, including 8 battleships. 188 planes were destroyed. Over 2,400 sailors, Marines, and soldiers were lost. And thousands were wounded. And a lot of them wounds, my friends, when you do the research, were absolutely horrific burns. Horrific. When I was doing this research, of course, me being in the medical field for decades, I was drawn to that, and what I was reading was just absolutely horrific. Now, the commanders of this battle, this is the Japanese commander, Admiral Yoshimoto, a brilliant tactician. And this is Admiral Husband Kimmel. He was in charge of naval and marine forces at Pearl. And this is General Walter Short. He was in charge of ground forces for the Army and the Army Air Corps. So now we got an understanding of who these people were. Now the commanders were caught by surprise. But Washington, D.C. wasn't caught by surprise. Folks, they were trying to get us into the war. The bankers wanted us into the war for a lot of reasons. And for the sake of time, I'm not going to get into all of that. But always ask, key bono, who's benefiting here? But one thing it did do, besides accumulate debt to which the bankers profit on, remember we did a couple of shows about how the bankers and industrialists were working with the Germans? Do you remember that? And we gave you absolute concrete footage of it. So, what also was going on in this country, my friends, was there was a lot of anxiety, anger, and suspicion on the American public towards the bankers and the government because of the Great Depression, which was a completely manipulated and implemented policy. But what it did was it took all this anxiety and anger, this kinetic energy that was focused on the bankers and on the government, and because of the outside threat of Pearl Harbor, it consolidated all of that anger, all that emotion, and put it on a foreign, outside entity. Very important that you understand that. Now, Oliver Littleton was the British Minister of Production in 1944. He made this quote: "Japan was provoked into attacking America at Pearl Harbor. It is a travesty of history to say that America was forced into the war." And again, the pre-war Gallup poll showed 88% of Americans did not want war. Publicly, Roosevelt said no war, as we just broadcast to you. Your boys are not, I say it again and again and again, your boys are not going to be sent to any foreign wars. So what was the plan? Harry Hopkins, it's called the Harry Hopkins Plan. It was an 8-point plan to force Japan's hand to attack us. Now, it wasn't written by Harry Hopkins. It was written by a Lieutenant Commander McCullum. But it's known as the Harry Hopkins Plan because he's the one who presented it. He's the one with FDR's approval who implemented it. Okay. So Hopkins, in January of 1941, is sent to meet with Churchill, Prime Minister of England. And this is a quote from the meeting: "The President is determined that we shall win the war together. Make no mistake about it, he has sent me here to tell you that at all cost and by all means, he will carry you through no matter what happens to him. There is nothing he will not do so far as he has human power." So here's Roosevelt telling the public, we're not going to war, and I'll say it again and again and again. But behind the scenes, he's telling Churchill, through Harry Hopkins and others, that we're going to war. We just got to make it happen. Okay, so let us continue. Now, by the end of that month, British and American military staffers began doing logistical and coordination meetings. And when you read the orders, their mission criteria, what they were to do, one of the things was to keep from any public disclosure. So in other words, they did not want the public to know that behind the scenes they were orchestrating to go to war. Now this almost got broken free. It almost got put out to the press. I found this very interesting. In 1940, a code clerk named Tyler Kent at the U.S. Embassy in London discovered the secret dispatches between FDR and Churchill, revealing that despite the contrary campaign promises, FDR was determined to engage the United States into the war. This is Kent's words, not mine. Kent smuggled some of the documents out of the embassy to alert the U.S. public, but he was caught. And with the U.S. government approval, he was tried in a secret British court and confined in a British prison till the end of the war. What were some of the things of this 8-point plan? One, FDR froze all of Japan's holdings and assets in the United States and other European countries. Also, he was shipping tons of arms to England. And also, what they wound up doing, my friends, is he would not allow the Japanese shipping to go through the Panama Canal. So the Japanese had to go all the way down to South America and back. That was big. He also put a complete oil embargo and petroleum, including rubber products, embargo on Japan. He also put an embargo on some medicines. So my friends, what they did was they basically forced Japan's hand to go into places like Burma and China and so forth for raw materials. Now, they did the same thing to Germany, believe it or not. They froze the German assets, and as I said, they sent 50 destroyers to England, the Lend-Lease. We did a Lend-Lease with Joseph Stalin, one of the biggest murderers in the history of man. You don't hear about that, but read the book, Major Jordan's Diary. It'll tell you all about it. But see, and it got to the point where I can't substantiate this, but when I was doing this research, I did come across some reports that said that the United States had actually depth charged some German U-boats in the Atlantic. But I will qualify that's unsubstantiated. I do have a method I like to qualify information before I can substantiate it. But you see, Germany didn't take the bait because Germany has a memory. They understood that when the United States entered World War I, it shifted the balance of power completely against Germany. They understood that. So Germany didn't take the bait. So Japan had a mutual defense agreement with Germany and Italy, forming the Axis coalition. And if you wish to look the treaty up, it was called the Tripartite, Tripartite Treaty. And Roosevelt, in his own words of recorded meetings, was thinking that because Japan had a treaty with Germany, a mutual defense treaty, that he thought that Tripartite Treaty would be to use his words, a back door to get into the European theater. As a matter of fact, Harold Ike, Secretary of the Interior, in October of 1941, gave a speech, and he said, "For a long time, I have believed that our best entrance into the war in Europe would be by way of Japan." So, Harry Hopkins, Lieutenant Commander Arthur McCollum, and that's McCollum, he develops this 8-point plan. And I just went over pretty much what they did. So, the people that were involved with this plan were Albert Hiss, George Marshall, Dexter White. And you may say, well, I don't know, who are they? Folks, all of these were known Soviet agents. All of them went on to be members of the Council on Foreign Relations. So, Lieutenant Commander McCollum, he was head of the Far East Desk of Office of Naval Intelligence. McCollum wrote, "If by these means, and the means being the 8-point plan, Japan could be led to commit an overt act of war, so much for the better. Now, FDR enacted all 8 provocative steps and more. Again, freezing assets, closing the Panama Canal to their shipping, halting all exports, which I just went over to you, and then Britain joined in the all-out embargo also. And folks, this is what made Japan go into Burma and go into China for raw natural resources. So the U.S. sends a hostile message through multiple communications in various offices. Now, on November 26, 1941, now this is just 11 days before the attack, the United States gives Japan an ultimatum demanding that it prerequisites to resume trade that Japan withdrew all troops from China and Indochina, which would be Indonesia, today Thailand, Southeast Asia. After the war, it was known as French Indonesia, until Dien Bien Phu and all that took place. So the United States says, if you want us to trade, you got to get out of China, you got to get out of Burma, you got to get out of Indonesia, and you got to abrogate from the Tripartite Treaty. Now, of course, Roosevelt knows they're not going to do this, because the 8-point plan has put him in this corner, if you would. And so he knows he wants to use that tripartite treaty to get the back door into the European war. So after the meeting with FDR, Secretary of War Henry Stimson wrote in his diary, and this is in October 16, 1941, "We face the delicate question of the diplomatic fencing to be done so as to be sure Japan is put into the wrong and makes the first bad overt move." Let us continue. On 11/25/41, he continued in his diary, "The question was how we should maneuver them," the Japanese, "into the position of firing the first shot." Think of that. So what was the bait? They needed bait. Well, FDR gave them the bait. FDR moved the Pacific Fleet, which was based on the West Coast in California, and to be permanently based, the fleet in Hawaii. Admiral J.O. Richardson, the fleet commander at the time, flew to Washington to protest FDR's decision. Again, to move the fleet from the West Coast to Pearl Harbor. And folks, when you read his reasons, they were quite sound. Pearl Harbor was vulnerable for many reasons. For examples, it was approachable from 360 degrees in any and all directions. Under the water, surface of the water, and above, 360 degrees. It could not be effectively rigged with nets and baffles to defend against torpedo planes. The location made it extremely difficult and very costly to supply, and had vulnerable supply lines, could be easily interrupted. It was difficult to supply and train troops, maintain equipment, replace equipment, develop new techniques, technologies, and weaponry. It lacked adequate fuel supplies and dry docks for repair. And also, by moving the fleet, the families didn't come with them, folks. It created some serious morale problems by separating the troops from their families. Richardson's comment post-FDR meeting, which the meeting, when you read this, became very heated, my friends. Very heated. But what did Admiral Richardson say? "I came away with the impression that, despite his spoken word, the president was fully determined to put the United States into war." Richardson refused and was relieved from his command. And this gentleman right here replaced Richardson, Admiral Kimmel. Kimmel also informed FDR of Pearl's deficiencies. Kimmel stayed on, however, expecting to be kept up to date on all intelligence, which really proved to be misplaced trust. As DC monitored Japan's military buildup, formation, and aggressiveness while keeping Kimmel and General Short out of the information pipeline. Now, so did we have any prior knowledge? Tokyo used a communication code. Remember the word code? Code, C-O-D, it comes from the word coda, to be altered secretly, known as the Purple Code, to communicate throughout the world through its diplomatic venues, embassies, and so forth. A talented group of American cryptologists broke the code in 1940. Let me read that again. They broke the Purple Code, my friends, in 1940. Okay, very important you remember that. And devised a facsimile of the Japanese machine. The code was so complex that it was enciphered and deciphered by machine. The U.S. had possession of all communications from Japan and understood its language. The deciphered text were called magic. Copies of all magic were promptly delivered to FDR in secured pouches, and the Secretary of State, Secretary of War and Navy, and also the Chief of Staff, George Marshall, and Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Harold Stock. Did you notice that you didn't see Kimball and Short's name listed? 3 major machines were sent to England. So Admiral Kimmel and Short requested the machines to be sent to Pearl Harbor. None were sent to the commanders at Pearl Harbor. Intercepted Japanese of ciphered messages to be sent back to DC for decrypting. So in other words, they had, they could receive the messages, then it had to be sent back to San Francisco, and then from San Francisco sent to Washington, D.C. to be deciphered, and then the reverse. That's a lot of time in 1941. So the ciphered messages had to be sent back to D.C. for decrypting. Okay? Again, Pearl Harbor requested a magic machine, but the request was denied by the D.C. On 10/9/1941, the War Department decoded a Tokyo Honolulu, instructing Consul General to divide Pearl Harbor into 5 specific areas, grids, to report the exact location of the ships therein. Charles Willoughby and Douglas MacArthur, who was Douglas MacArthur's chief of intelligence, later wrote that the reports were on a grid system of the inner harbor with coordinated locations of all the American men of war. Coordinated grid is the classic method for pinpoint target designation. Our battleships had suddenly become targets. This information was never sent to Admirals Kimball or Short. On 11/5/41, Tokyo notified its Washington ambassador that 11/25/41 was a deadline for agreement with the United States. On 11/11/41, they sent another message from Tokyo to Washington that the situation is nearing climax, time is getting short. On 11/16, the deadline was pushed back to 11/29. And again, folks, we are reading this verbatim. The deadline absolutely cannot be changed. After that, things are automatically going to happen. 11/29/41, the ambassadors told a rupture in the negotiations was inevitable. Do not give the impressions that negotiations are broke off. On 11/30/41, Tokyo orders its Berlin embassy to inform the German hierarchy that the breaking out of war may come as quicker than anyone dreams. On 12/1/41, Japanese embassy in non-access nations around the world are directed to dispose of their secret documents in all but one copy of their codes. Now, folks, understand that we are listening and deciphering all this. On 11/18, the famous winds message radio warning message repeated 3 times, Higashi no kaze ame, which means east wind rain. Folks, when you break this down, east wind meant the United States, and rain meant that diplomacy was over. In effect, it was war. Now, Japan had a history, and FDR was well aware of it, that once diplomatic policies were eroded, Japan would attack. They had done it 3 times since 1894. Okay, and Roosevelt was very much aware of this. He was former Secretary of the Navy. Okay, so according to Robert Stinnett, U.S. intelligence also was cracking all the Japanese naval code, and FDR had access to all naval transcripts through his routing officer, Lieutenant Commander McCullum. There's Mr. McCullum again. So secret that were these transcripts that all 10 investigations about Pearl Harbor did not have knowledge of the naval dispatch codes being broken. From Admiral Yoshimoto to the Japanese First Air Fleet on 11/26/41. Now don't forget, folks, we're reading this. The task force, keeping its movement strictly secret and maintaining close guard against submarines and aircraft, shall advance into Hawaiian waters and upon the very opening of hostilities shall attack the main force of the United States fleet and deal them a mortal blow. The first air raid is planned for the new dawn of X date, exact date to be given by later order. On 11/17, Congressman Martin Dies wrote, early in 41, the Dies Committee came into possession of a strategic map which gave clear proof of the intentions of the Japanese to make an assault at Pearl Harbor. The map was prepared by the Japanese Imperial Military Intelligence Department. As soon as I received the document, I telephoned Secretary of State Cordell Hull and told him what I had. Secretary Hull directed me not to let anybody know about the map, stated he would call me as soon as he spoke with the president. In about an hour, he telephoned me to say not to let anyone know about the map, as it would be very serious if any information concerning this map reached the news service. I told him it was a grave responsibility to withhold such vital information from the public. The secretary assured me that he and the president considered it essential to national defense. In the summer of 41, there was a double agent who was loyal to the Allies. He was a double agent for Germany, but he was loyal to England. His name was Duško Popov. He was a Yugoslavian. And he was ordered to make a detailed study of Pearl Harbor and its nearby airfields. The agent deduced that this betokened a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor by Japan. In August of 41, he fully reported this to the FBI in New York. J. Edgar Hoover later bitterly recalled that he had personally provided the warnings to FDR. Hoover, who was told by FDR not to pass the information any further and just leave it in his hands. Kilso Han of the Sino-Korean People's League received information from Korean underground that Japan was planning to attack Pearl Harbor before Christmas. In 11/14, after getting nowhere with the State Department, Han convinced Iowa Senator Guy Gillette about the information. Gillette personally briefed FDR, who thanked him and told him it would be looked into. In Java, in early December, the Dutch Army decoded a dispatch from Tokyo to its Bangkok embassy, forecasting a total of 4 sites with Pearl Harbor being listed. And the 4 sites, they all hit. The Dutch passed the information to Brigadier General Elliot Thorpe, the United States Army. Thorpe was sent to D.C. 4 warnings, last going to General Marshall's intelligence chief. Thorpe was ordered, listen to this, Thorpe was ordered not to send any more dispatches on the subject. The Dutch also had their D.C. military attaché, Colonel Weijerman, personally warned General Captain Johan Ranett, and Ranett, my friends, was awarded the Legion of Merit at one time, recorded details in his diary. On December 2nd, Ranett visited the Office of Naval Intelligence, and Ranett inquired about the Pacific. The NSA officer pointing to a wall map said the Japanese task force is proceeding east, the spot between Japan and Hawaii. On 11/6, on 12/6/41, Rennet was returned and asked the location of the Japanese task force. He was shown a position on the map of 300 miles northwest of Pearl Harbor. Rennet wrote, I asked, what is the meaning of the carriers at this location? Whereupon I received the answer that it is probably in connection with the Japanese reports of eventual American action. The officer continued, I don't think too much about it because everyone is 100% on alert at Pearl, just as we are here at ONI, Office of Naval Intelligence. 11/29, Secretary of State Cordell Hull secretly met with a newspaper writer, Joseph Lieb, who had former positions in the FDR administration. Hull gave him the purple transcripts and hoped to expose it to the public, and FDR allowing it to happen. Lieb went to Lyle Wilson, who was the Washington Democrat bureau chief of the United Press. Wilson thought this was ludicrous and refused to run it. Now, folks, when the attack did happen, them two gentlemen were together, and when it happened, they physically cried. November 41, General George Marshall made a statement at a private meeting that war between Japan and the United States would happen within the first 10 days of December. 11/41, Lieutenant Commander McCullum wrote Kimmel, Naval Intelligence places no credence in the rumors, furthermore, based no data regarding the present disposition and deployment of Japanese naval and army forces. No move against Pearl Harbor appears imminent or planned in the foreseeable future. There's McCullum, who wrote the 8-point plan to make Japan attack. 11/25. Listen to this, folks. 11/25. 1 hour after the Japanese task force deployment, the U.S. Navy issued an order forbidding U.S. and Allied travel via the North Pacific. All trans-Pacific shipping was to be rerouted through the South Pacific, and this included the Russian ships off the West Coast. Why do you think they did that? Because they knew the Japanese fleets had left Hiroshima and Tokyo Harbor. They knew where the rendezvous point was. They knew where they were coming into Pearl Harbor. They did not want them to be seen by merchant marines, commercial shipping or any naval shipping. That's aiding and abetting. That's not just blocking the information from getting to the proper people. That is aiding and abetting an attack on your own country. Let us continue. And also, this redirection included the Russian ships that were on the U.S. West Coast. Rear Admiral Richard K. Turner was a war plan officer in 41. We were prepared to divert traffic when we believed war was imminent. So, yeah, he was a war planner, okay? They were planning it just fine. We sent traffic down via the Torres Strait so that the track of the Japanese task force would be clear of any traffic. Kimmel sends 46 warships to the North Pacific without no orders from Washington. This is late November 1941. Admiral Kimball sends 46 warships to the Northern Pacific due to his belief that the relations between Japan are deteriorating, and without notifying D.C. He even ordered the fleet to perform a mock air raid on Pearl Harbor. Folks, he selected the very same launch site that Admiral Yoshimoto did. Okay? When D.C. found out about this operation, they countermanded Kimmel and ordered all the ships back to the Pearl Harbor docks. Think of that. Kimball and Vice Admiral William Halsey issued orders for a 25-ship task force to guard against, quote-unquote, mission criteria, potential enemy air and sub-attack. It was blocked by Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Stark, who ordered Halsey to shuttle transport planes to Wake and Midway Islands, further depleting the air defenses. Now, my friends, I'm running out of time, but they wanted the Japanese to attack. They wanted the Japanese to think that the aircraft carriers were in dock, And so they took the USS Utah and they decoyed it as an aircraft carrier. And this is why Yoyomoto didn't come back for succession attacks, because he thought it was an ambush. 1127, war warning to Kimmel and Short for the, listen where the war warnings are. The Philippines, Thailand, or the Krai Peninsula, and partially Borneo. All right? And also in that warning was sabotage, look for sabotage in Guam and Samoa. 12/6, the United States decoded 13 of a 14-part of a Japanese directive to the United States following up investigations. Neither General Marshall or Admiral Stark could recall where they were on the 6th. Isn't that something? 12/7, Stark arrived at 9:25 in the office, given a message by junior officer, pointed possible attack on Hawaii, urged notification to Kimmel. Stark refused, did nothing all morning. Years later, he stated he had clear conscience due to the following orders by higher authority. Folks, there was only one higher authority to him, and that was the President of the United States. At the War Department, Colonel Ruffius Brayton, head of the U.S. Army Far East Section, wanted to issue warnings to General Short, and told him, but the Chief of Intelligence told him nothing could be done until General Marshall came in. Marshall came in late, and time was short. He could have picked up his phone and called Short directly. Instead, he wrote a dispatch, and after it was encoded, it went to the Washington office of Western Union. From there, it was relayed to the San Francisco office, and from there, it was transmitted via the RCA commercial radio to Honolulu. General Short received this warning 6 hours after the attack. The Roberts Commission placed blame on dereliction of duty against Kimmel and Short. All members of this commission were cronies of Marshall, FDR, and Stark. Admiral Richardson, it is the most unfit justice and deceitfully dishonest document ever printed by the government printing office. The commission spent 19 days in Hawaii. When Admiral Husband Kimmel was summoned, he brought counsel with him. Justice Roberts disallowed any kind of counsel on the grounds that this is an investigation and not a trial, and that the admiral was not a defendant. Because Kimmel and Short were not on trial, they were denied all traditional rights of defendants, including to ask questions and cross-examine witnesses. Stenographers were a teenager, and the other was one with very little court experience, having much omissions, errors, and garble. They could not, in other words, the official record was, to say the least, not up to par. In 1944, the public demanded court-martials. FDR did not want one and tried to delay it or make it go away. In August of 44, the Naval Court of Inquiry opened obstruction after obstruction to keep the magic transcripts out. Failed when, in a ploy, walking out of the courtroom, Kimball said to his attorney that they would tell the press that they would, of the information being suppressed. The next day, the requested intercepts were delivered. This is the magic, Mal, the intercepts that we had deciphered. And there was a total of 43 of them. 43 of them that were all kept from Kimmel and Short regarding Pearl Harbor. The admirals who were on the board listened in looks of horror and disbelief. Kimball and Short were completely exonerated of all charges. The final statement from the board's report was this: we knew the United States, Washington, D.C. knew every move of the Japanese fleet and their intentions up to the morning of 7 December 1941. Everything that the Japanese were planning to do was known to Washington, D.C. You know what, when I was doing the research on this, what this made me think of? The 9/11 Commission reports. When we had 6 of them come out and say that the investigation was a sham, there was information they were not allowed to view, and they had no faith in its outcome. My friends, now you know the story behind Pearl Harbor. Not only did FDR publicly say there was going to be no war, not only did Lieutenant Commander McCullum come up with an 8-point plan to force Japan to be aggressive abroad and finally have to attack the United States, we actually aided and abetted the Japanese fleet to strike at Pearl, to the death of over 2,400 U.S. troops and horrific injuries. So my friends, understand this is all possible today. We saw it with 9/11, and we see it today. It's all the same thing, my friends. The lies, the implementations, the people that they answer to is not us. As William Carr wrote in his book, Pawns on the Board, we are just that. We are pawns. And we see a very limited view of the wide spectrum of the board. And we don't see the people who develop the board, develop the rules of the games, control the kings and the queens and the bishops and the knights of the board. We don't see them because we're the pawns. We go and do the bleeding on lies while the bankers profit on our blood and the blood that we spill around the world. We have gone over the events of 9/11. A lot of questions there. We have just gone over some of the events in a short time that brought us to the event that we just celebrated the anniversary of, known as Pearl Harbor. My friends always ask, qui bono? Who benefits? Anytime anything is going on, who benefits? Whether it's just to control the narrative or to get you to send your sons and daughters to go to war or to give up more of your precious, dwindling liberties. Qui bono? Who benefits? My friends, we are very thankful you take the time from your busy day to view our program. We always close in asking you to seek truth, to obtain knowledge, and to manifest kindness to your fellow man. And we always close in reminding you that your government is your responsibility. We thank you for watching.
Got to read between the lines. Got to read between the lines. Well, the truth is very simple, very hard to find. Can't believe